the dusty streets of La Junta, Colorado, baked under the merciless August sun in 1878. And Xavier Vance had seen a lot of things in his 26 years riding across the Western Territories. But nothing prepared him for the sight of a young woman on her knees outside Doc Patterson's office, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Please," she was saying, her voice hoarse from what must have been hours of pleading. "My brother is dying. I just need enough for 3 doses. I will pay you back, I swear on everything holy." Doc Patterson stood in his doorway, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. "Miss Kelley, I have heard that song before. No credit. Cash only. Those are the rules." Xavier had just finished selling a herd of cattle to the railroad company, his saddlebags heavy with more money than he had seen in 2 years. He had been heading to the saloon to celebrate, to wash the trail dust from his throat and maybe find a card game. But something about the desperation in the woman's voice stopped him cold. She was young, probably around 22 or 23, with honey-colored hair falling loose from its pins and a dress that had once been nice, but now showed the wear of hard times. Her hands were clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "How much does the medicine cost?" Xavier heard himself asking before he had fully decided to get involved. The woman's head snapped up, and he found himself looking into the most striking blue eyes he had ever seen. They were red-rimmed from crying, but even exhausted and desperate. There was something fierce in them, something that spoke of strength not yet broken. Doc Patterson's expression shifted to one of interest. "The laudanum and fever powder she needs would run about $15 for a full treatment, but I also got tonics and poultices that might help, depending on what ails the boy." "What is wrong with your brother?" Xavier asked the woman directly. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. He realized she probably had not eaten in a while. Pneumonia. He caught a chill working in the rain 2 weeks ago, and it just got worse and worse. "Our parents died last year from cholera. It is just the 2 of us now. Thomas is only 19. He is all the family I have left in this world." Her voice broke on the last words, and Xavier felt something twist in his chest. He knew what it was like to lose family. He knew what it was like to feel alone. "Give me everything she might need," Xavier said, pulling out his money. "The laudanum, the fever powder, whatever tonics you think could help, and throw in some beef broth and bread from the general store next door." Doc Patterson's eyebrows rose. "That will be near $30. "Then $30 it is." The woman, Miss Kelley, stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign tongue. "I cannot. That is too much. I could never repay you." Xavier pulled out the bills and handed them to Doc Patterson, who immediately started gathering bottles and packets. "Your worries end today," Xavier said, meeting her gaze steadily. "No need for repayment. Just take care of your brother." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but these were different. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" He thought about it for a moment, about all the times he had needed help and found none, about the loneliness of the trail and the way luck could turn on a dime out here. "Because somebody should," he said simply. "And today, I have got the means to be that somebody." Doc Patterson came back with a box full of supplies. "This should last about 2 weeks if you follow my instructions. Give him the laudanum for the pain, but sparingly. The fever powder mixed with water every 4 hours, and get as much broth into him as he can take." The woman reached for the box, but Xavier took it first. "I will carry it for you. Where are you staying?" "The old Murphy boarding house on 3rd Street. Room 6 at the top of the stairs, but you have done enough. I can manage." "Miss, you look like a strong wind would knock you over." "Let me help you get this home at least." She hesitated, pride warring with practicality in her expression. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you. My name is Beatrice Kelley. My friends call me B. Xavier Vance. Most folks just call me Vance." They walked through the dusty streets of La Junta, and Xavier could feel the curious stares following them. It was not a huge town, maybe 700 people, and strangers were always noticed. Beatrice walked with her spine straight despite her exhaustion, and he found himself admiring her determination. The Murphy boarding house was a weathered two-story building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, and the steps creaked under their weight. Beatrice led him up the narrow staircase to a small room at the end of the hall. The smell hit him first, the sour scent of sickness. A young man lay on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored and wet. Even from the doorway, Xavier could hear the rattle in his lungs. "Tommy," Beatrice said softly, hurrying to his side. "I am back. I brought medicine." The boy's eyes fluttered open. He did look young, barely out of boyhood, with the same honey-colored hair as his sister but fever-bright eyes that did not quite focus. "B," he whispered. "You should not have spent the money." "Hush now," she said, already mixing the fever powder into a cup of water from the pitcher on the washstand. "Everything is going to be fine." Xavier set the box down on the small table by the window and watched as Beatrice carefully lifted her brother's head to help him drink. The boy coughed, spilling some of the mixture, but she was patient, waiting for the fit to pass before trying again. "I should let you tend to him," Xavier said. "I will be at the Grand Hotel if you need anything else." Beatrice looked up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes was almost overwhelming. "I do not know how to thank you, Mr. Vance. Just Vance, and you do not need to thank me. Just help your brother get well." He left before she could say anything else, stepping out into the late afternoon heat. His stomach growled, reminding him he had not eaten since dawn. The Grand Hotel had a decent restaurant, and he made his way there, his mind still on the young woman and her sick brother. The hotel restaurant was busy with the dinner crowd, ranchers and railroad men and the occasional traveler passing through. Xavier found a table in the corner and ordered a steak with potatoes and coffee. As he ate, he found his thoughts drifting back to Beatrice Kelley and those fierce blue eyes. He had been drifting for 3 years now, ever since his father died and the family ranch in Texas had to be sold to pay debts. His mother had passed when he was 12, and his father had never quite recovered from losing her. Xavier had tried to hold things together, but sometimes the cards were just stacked against you. Since then, he had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, whatever paid enough to keep him fed and sheltered. He was good with cattle and even better with horses, and he could usually find work when he needed it. But it was a lonely life, always moving, never putting down roots. Something about Beatrice's situation had struck a chord with him. Maybe it was seeing someone fighting so hard to save family when he had none left. Maybe it was the way she had not given up, even when the doctor turned her away. Whatever it was, he could not quite shake the image of her from his mind. He finished his meal and went up to his room, a small but clean space with a real bed and a window overlooking the main street. He could hear piano music drifting up from the saloon across the way, the laughter and shouts of men enjoying their evening. But he did not feel like celebrating anymore. Instead, he found himself wondering if Thomas Kelley was responding to the medicine, if Beatrice had managed to get some food into herself. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, his dreams were filled with blue eyes and honey-colored hair. The next morning, Xavier woke early, as was his habit. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink when he dressed and headed downstairs. He ate a quick breakfast of eggs and biscuits, then found himself walking toward 3rd Street without consciously deciding to do so. The boarding house looked even more run down in the harsh morning light. He hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, unsure if he should go up. But then he saw Beatrice herself, coming down the steps with an empty bucket in her hand. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she had not slept at all. "Vance," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "What brings you here so early?" "I wanted to check on your brother, see how he is doing." Her face softened. "That is kind of you. He had a rough night, but I think the fever might have broken around dawn. He is sleeping now, actually sleeping instead of that restless tossing he has been doing for days." Relief washed through him. "That is good news. Would you like to come up?" "I was just going to get some fresh water from the pump, but it will only take a minute." "Let me get the water for you," Xavier said, taking the bucket from her hands. "You go rest." "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering." He saw the protest die on her lips as another wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Xavier made 3 trips to the pump, filling not just the one bucket but also a spare he found by the back door and a large basin for washing. When he carried them up to the room, he found Beatrice had fallen asleep sitting in the chair beside her brother's bed, her head tilted at an angle that would give her a terrible crick in her neck. Thomas was indeed sleeping peacefully, his breathing still labored but not as wet-sounding as the night before. The flush had faded from his cheeks, leaving him pale but no longer dangerously feverish. Xavier set the water down quietly and stood for a moment, watching them. Brother and sister, alone in the world, fighting to survive. He thought about leaving, letting Beatrice rest, but something made him stay. He settled into the only other chair in the room, a rickety wooden thing by the window, and kept watch. An hour passed, then 2. The boarding house came alive around them, the sounds of other tenants moving about, doors opening and closing, footsteps on the stairs. Through the window, he could see La Junta waking up, people heading to work, wagons rolling down the street. Beatrice finally stirred around 8 o'clock, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked disoriented, then she saw him and sat up straight, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. "You stayed," she said. "I figured somebody should keep an eye on things while you rested." She looked at her brother, relief flooding her face when she saw him sleeping peacefully. "Thank you. Again. I keep saying that, but I do not know what else to say." "You could say you will let me buy you breakfast," Xavier said. "When is the last time you ate?" She thought about it. "Yesterday morning, I think, maybe the morning before. The days have kind of blurred together." "There is a cafe 2 blocks over that makes decent flapjacks. Your brother is sleeping. We could go eat and be back in half an hour." Beatrice hesitated, looking at Thomas. "I should not leave him." "I will ask Mrs. Murphy to look in on him. I saw her downstairs earlier." Still, she wavered. Xavier stood up and offered his hand. "You cannot take care of him if you collapse from hunger. Come on." Finally, she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her hand was small in his, and he could feel the calluses on her palm, the roughness that spoke of hard work. When she stood, he realized she was shorter than he had thought, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. They went downstairs, and Xavier arranged for Mrs. Murphy, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes, to check on Thomas. Then they walked to the cafe, a small place called Rosie's that smelled of coffee and bacon. Beatrice ate like she had not seen food in a week, putting away a stack of flapjacks, 3 eggs, and 4 pieces of bacon. Xavier found himself delighted by her appetite, the way she did not pretend to pick at her food like some women might have. "Sorry," she said, finally slowing down. "That was not very ladylike." "That was human," Xavier said. "No need to apologize for taking care of yourself." She sipped her coffee, and some color had returned to her cheeks. In the better light of the cafe, he could see that she was truly beautiful, not in the painted, preening way of saloon girls, but in a natural, wholesome way that made his heart beat a little faster. "Tell me about yourself," he said. How did you and your brother end up in La Junta? Beatrice wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring down into the dark liquid. We had a farm in Kansas near Dodge City. My father was a wheat farmer. We were not rich, but we had enough. Then last summer, cholera swept through. My mother went first, then my father 3 days later. Thomas and I buried them on the hill behind the house. Her voice was steady, but Xavier could hear the pain underneath. We tried to keep the farm going, but the bank wanted money we did not have. Taxes, they said, and interest on loans I did not even know my father had taken out. We sold everything, but it was barely enough to settle the debts. Thomas had heard there was work in Colorado, with the railroad expanding and ranches always needing hands, so we came here 2 months ago. What kind of work were you hoping to find? Thomas wanted to work for the railroad. He is good with his hands, smart. I thought I could find work as a seamstress or maybe a cook. I am decent with a needle, and my mother taught me to cook for a large family. Any luck? She shook her head. The railroad was not hiring when we got here. They said to check back in the fall. Thomas found work at the stockyards, but it is hard labor for poor pay. I got some mending work here and there, but not enough to really get ahead. We were just barely scraping by when he got sick. No other family. None that would claim us. My father had a brother in Missouri, but they had a falling out years ago. My mother's people are all back east, and we lost touch with them when I was a child. Xavier understood that kind of isolation, that feeling of being adrift in the world. What will you do once Thomas is well? I do not know, she admitted. We owe Mrs. Murphy 2 weeks' rent. I have been doing laundry for her to help cover it, but we will need to find real work soon or we will be on the street. An idea had been forming in Xavier's mind since the night before, growing stronger with each hour he spent in Beatrice's company. It was crazy, probably, and certainly impulsive. But out here in the West, sometimes you had to take chances. I have a proposition for you, he said carefully. Hear me out before you say no. She looked at him warily. What kind of proposition? I just got paid for a cattle drive. I have enough money to buy a small spread, nothing fancy, but enough land to run some cattle and maybe grow some crops. I have been thinking about settling down, putting down roots somewhere. I am good with animals and I know ranching, but I do not know much about running a household, and I could use help getting started. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Mr. Vance, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, I should tell you that I am not that kind of woman. No, Xavier said quickly. That came out wrong. I am suggesting that I hire you as a housekeeper, you and Thomas both. Once he is well, he could work the ranch with me. You could handle the house, the cooking, the chickens, and garden. I would pay you both fair wages and you would have a place to live. She stared at him for a long moment. Why would you do this? You do not even know us. I know that you love your brother enough to beg in the street for him. I know that you have not given up even when things got desperate. I know that you are honest and hardworking. That is more than I can say for most people I have met. We would be in your debt. It would not be charity. It would be employment. I need help and you need work. It is a fair trade. Beatrice bit her lip, thinking. He could see the hope warring with caution in her eyes. Where is this land you are thinking of buying? There is a spread about 10 miles west of here, along the Arkansas River. 500 acres with a small house and a barn. The owner died without heirs and the bank is selling it for back taxes. It is not much, but it is a start. When would this arrangement begin? As soon as Thomas is well enough to travel. Could be a week, could be 2. In the meantime, I will pay your room and board here and I will get started on buying the land and fixing up the house. She studied him carefully, and he tried to keep his expression open and honest. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, but we will earn our keep, Mr. Vance. I do not take charity. I would not expect anything less, And please call me Vance, or Xavier if you prefer." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Vance then, and you should call me B." They shook hands across the table, and Xavier felt a surge of something he had not felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or purpose, or possibly something more complicated that he was not ready to name yet. They walked back to the boarding house together, and Thomas was awake when they arrived, propped up on pillows and looking weak but alert. His eyes were clear, the fever truly broken. "You must be the man B has been telling me about," Thomas said, his voice raspy. "The one who bought the medicine." "Xavier Vance," he said, shaking the young man's hand. It was still too warm, but nothing like the burning heat of the night before. "You are looking better. Feeling better too. B told me what you did. I do not know how to thank you. Your sister and I just worked out a way you can. When you are back on your feet, how would you feel about working a ranch?" Thomas's eyes lit up. "Really? You are serious?" Xavier explained the plan again and watched as relief and excitement chased each other across Thomas's face. The boy had the same inner strength as his sister, the same determination not to be beaten down by circumstances. Over the next week, Xavier became a regular fixture at the boarding house. He brought meals from Rossi's cafe, carried water, and sat with Thomas while Beatrice caught up on sleep. He also spent his days making arrangements, meeting with the bank about the land, hiring a lawyer to handle the paperwork, and buying supplies they would need for the ranch. The property was exactly as advertised, a modest spread with good water and decent grazing. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solidly built with a good roof and a stone fireplace. The barn needed some work, but nothing that could not be fixed with time and effort. He hired 2 men from town to help him make basic repairs, replacing broken windows and patching holes in the barn roof. He bought furniture, basic pieces that would serve their needs, and stocked the pantry with flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and other staples. Every evening, he would return to the boarding house and tell Beatrice and Thomas about the progress. Thomas was improving daily, able to sit up without assistance, then to walk around the room, then finally to make it down the stairs and sit outside in the fresh air. During these evenings, Xavier learned more about the Kelley siblings. Thomas had dreams of maybe raising horses someday, breeding quality stock. Beatrice loved to read, though she had not owned a book since they sold the farm. They both had a wry sense of humor and an easy way of talking that made Xavier feel welcome. He also became aware that his feelings for Beatrice were growing beyond simple compassion or admiration. He found himself watching for her smile, listening for her laugh. When their hands accidentally touched while passing a plate or cup, he felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. But he kept these feelings to himself. She had enough to worry about without him complicating things with unwanted romantic attention. Besides, he was not sure if what he felt was real or just the natural result of spending so much time together. He had been alone for so long that maybe he was just starved for companionship. 2 weeks after that first day outside Doc Patterson's office, Thomas was declared well enough to leave town. The pneumonia had not left any lasting damage, though Doc Patterson warned that he should take things easy for another month, building his strength back slowly. Xavier rented a wagon for the journey, padding the back with blankets for Thomas to rest on during the ride. Beatrice sat up front beside him, and as they rolled out of La Junta in the early morning light, he saw her looking back at the town with an unreadable expression. "Regrets?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just thinking about how quickly life can change. A month ago I was desperate and alone. Now I have hope again." "We all need hope," Xavier said. The ride to the ranch took about 3 hours, following the Arkansas River west through rolling prairie land. The August sun was hot, but a breeze from the river kept it bearable. They passed a few other ranches, neighbors Xavier would need to meet eventually, and herds of cattle grazing on the open range. When they topped the last rise and the ranch came into view, Xavier felt a surge of pride mixed with nervousness. Would they like it? Would it be enough? The house sat in a small valley with the river glinting in the distance. Cottonwood trees provided shade near the house, and the barn stood solid against the blue sky. It was not grand, but it was theirs. Well, his legally, but theirs in spirit. "It is beautiful," Beatrice said softly, and the wonder in her voice made everything worthwhile. Thomas sat up in the back of the wagon, taking it all in. "Is that really going to be our home?" "If you want it to be," Xavier said. He helped Thomas down from the wagon, and the three of them walked toward the house together. Xavier had left the door unlocked, and when he pushed it open, he watched their faces carefully. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with the stone fireplace dominating one wall. He had bought a sturdy table and chairs, a rocking chair for beside the fire, and basic cooking equipment. 2 doors led to the small bedrooms, one of which he had set up for Beatrice with a proper bed frame and mattress, and the other for Thomas with similar furnishings. His own bedroll was in the barn loft, where he planned to sleep until he could build on another room. "Vance," Beatrice said, turning to him with tears in her eyes, "you set this all up for us. We need a place to live," he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I hope it is all right." "It is more than all right. It is wonderful." Thomas was already exploring, opening cupboards and exclaiming over the supplies. "There is enough food here to last a month." "We are 10 miles from town," Xavier said. "I figured we should stock up. And I got chickens coming next week, and a milk cow. We will need to build a proper chicken coop, but that is a project for when you are feeling stronger." They spent the rest of the day settling in. Xavier showed them around the property, pointing out the good grazing land, the best fishing spots in the river, the places where wild berries grew. Beatrice claimed the kitchen as her domain and insisted on making dinner, creating a surprisingly good stew from the dried beef and vegetables Xavier had stocked. That night, sitting around the table eating together, Xavier felt something he had not felt since his father died. He felt like he was part of a family again. The days fell into a routine. Xavier woke before dawn and did the heavy ranch work, repairing fences, clearing brush, and planning where to put the cattle he hoped to buy in the spring. Thomas helped when he could, though Xavier made sure he did not overdo it. The young man was eager and hardworking, quick to learn and not afraid to ask questions. Beatrice transformed the house into a home. She sewed curtains from fabric. Xavier bought on his next trip to town, started a vegetable garden near the house, and filled the air with the smells of baking bread and simmering meals. She sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs, and the sound made the empty prairie feel less lonely. Xavier made a point to keep his distance, maintaining a respectful employer-employee relationship. But it was getting harder. He found himself making excuses to be near her, to talk to her, to see her smile. When she laughed at something Thomas said, he felt it in his chest like a physical thing. When she brushed past him in the kitchen, his skin seemed to burn where they had almost touched. He told himself it was just proximity, just the natural attraction between a man and woman living in close quarters. But he knew it was more than that. He was falling in love with her strength and kindness, with the way she faced each day with determination and grace. One evening, about a month after they had moved to the ranch, Xavier was in the barn tending to the horses when Beatrice came in carrying a basket. "I brought you some supper," she said. You missed dinner. Sorry, I was working on this tack, lost track of time. She set the basket down on a bench and watched as he worked, his hands moving with practiced ease over the leather. You are good at that. My father taught me. He said a man should know how to do everything his ranch needs, from shoeing horses to mending tack. He sounds like he was a wise man. He was stubborn and not great with money, but wise in his own way. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really help us that day? I know what you said about having the means, but there is more to it than that. I can tell. Xavier set down the bridle he had been working on and looked at her. The setting sun slanted through the barn door, turning her hair to gold. I was alone for a long time after my father died. I drifted from job to job, town to town, never putting down roots. I told myself I was free, that I did not need anyone, but the truth is I was lonely. He paused, trying to find the right words. When I saw you outside that doctor's office, fighting so hard to save your brother, it reminded me of what mattered. Family. Connection. Having something worth fighting for. I had just gotten paid, and for the first time in years, I had enough money to make a real difference. So I did. And the ranch, hiring us. I meant what I said about needing help, but I also wanted to build something that mattered, something permanent. I have been running from being alone for 3 years. I figured it was time to stop running. Beatrice stepped closer to him, her blue eyes searching his face. I am glad you stopped running. I am glad you were in La Junta that day. Me too, he said quietly. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken. Xavier could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. It would be so easy to close the distance between them, to pull her into his arms. But he did not. She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and her home. It would not be right to take advantage of that, no matter what he felt. Beatrice seemed to sense his inner struggle. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. Thank you for dinner, he said, his voice rough. I should eat before it gets cold. She nodded and stepped back, the moment broken. Of course, I will let you get back to your work. After she left, Xavier sat on the bench and ate the meal she had brought, barely tasting it. He was in trouble, he realized. He was in love with Beatrice Kelley, and he had no idea what to do about it. The situation became more complicated as fall approached. A neighboring rancher, a man named Charles Morrison, started finding excuses to visit their property. He was in his 40s, recently widowed and clearly interested in Beatrice. He would show up with gifts, fresh killed game or vegetables from his garden, and stay to chat, directing most of his attention to her. Xavier told himself he had no right to be jealous. Beatrice was free to entertain the attentions of any man she chose. But watching Morrison smile at her, hearing him laugh at her jokes, it made Xavier's jaw clench and his hands curl into fists. Thomas noticed, of course. One evening after Morrison had finally left, the young man cornered Xavier in the barn. You know you are being an idiot, right? What are you talking about? About my sister? About Morrison? About the fact that you are clearly in love with her but too stubborn to do anything about it? Xavier started to deny it, but Thomas cut him off. Do not bother lying. It is obvious to everyone, probably even Bea herself. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I cannot do anything about it. She works for me. It would not be appropriate. So change the arrangement, court her properly, ask her to dinner in town, let her know how you feel. What if she does not feel the same way? Thomas laughed. Are you blind? She looks at you the same way you look at her, like you hung the moon and stars, but she is just as scared as you are, probably worried that you only see her as an employee or worse, as a charity case. I would never see her that way. Then tell her that. Tell her how you really feel before Morrison convinces her to give him a chance. Xavier thought about it for a long time that night, lying in his bedroll in the barn loft. He had spent 3 years running from connection, from the possibility of loss. But maybe Thomas was right. Maybe it was time to take a chance. The next morning he asked Beatrice to take a walk with him after breakfast. They followed the river away from the house, the early morning sun warm on their faces. "Is something wrong?" Beatrice asked. "You seem nervous." "I need to talk to you about something." "About our arrangement here." He saw fear flash across her face. "Are you unhappy with our work? Is Thomas not recovering fast enough?" "No, nothing like that. You are both doing wonderful work. The ranch would not be half of what it is without you." "Then what is it?" They had reached a bend in the river where a large cottonwood provided shade. Xavier stopped and turned to face her, his heart pounding. "I have not been entirely honest with you about my reasons for bringing you here." Beatrice went very still. "What do you mean?" "I told you I needed help with the ranch, and that is true. I told you I wanted to build something permanent, and that is also true, but there is more to it than that." He took a deep breath. "From the moment I saw you outside Doc Patterson's office, I felt drawn to you. And the more time I have spent with you, the more certain I have become. I have feelings for you, strong feelings. I did not want to say anything because I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated because of our employment arrangement. But watching Morrison court you, knowing he could offer you things I cannot, it is making me crazy." Beatrice stared at him, her eyes wide. "You have feelings for me. I know I am not much of a catch. I do not have a fancy house or a huge spread. I am just a cowboy trying to build a life. But I am hardworking and honest, and I would spend every day trying to make you happy if you would give me the chance." "Xavier Vance," she said, and there was something in her voice that made his heart skip. "Do you really think I care about fancy houses or huge spreads?" "I do not know what you care about. I care about a man who would buy medicine for a stranger. A man who would offer work instead of charity because he understood that dignity matters. A man who treats my brother like family and makes me laugh and has been so respectful that I was starting to think maybe I had imagined the way he looked at me sometimes." Hope surged through him. "You have not imagined anything. Charles Morrison is a nice man," Beatrice said. "But he is not the man I think about when I wake up in the morning. He is not the man whose smile makes my day brighter or whose opinion matters more than anyone else's." Xavier took a step closer. "And who is that man? I think you know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was soft, her eyes searching his. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "I thought you would never ask." Their lips met softly at first, tentatively, like they were both afraid the other might disappear. But then Beatrice's arms came up around his neck, and Xavier pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the longing and hope they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it is fast and maybe I should wait to say it, but I do. I love you, Beatrice Kelley." "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks now. I just did not dare hope you felt the same way." They stood there by the river, holding each other, and Xavier felt like his life was finally making sense. All the drifting, all the loneliness, it had led him to that day in La Junta, to the moment when he saw a woman in need and chose to help. And that choice had brought him here to this moment, to this woman who fit in his arms like she was made to be there. "So what do we do now?" Beatrice asked. "Now I court you properly. I take you to dinner in town. I ask your brother's permission. I do this right." She laughed. "Thomas already knows. He has been pestering me for weeks to tell you how I feel. Smart kid." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Thomas took one look at their faces and grinned. "About time," he said. I was starting to think I would have to lock you two in the barn together." Over the next months, Xavier courted Beatrice the way she deserved. He took her to dinner at the best restaurant La Junta had to offer, which was not saying much, but the gesture mattered. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and books from the general store. They would take long walks along the river, talking about everything and nothing, learning the contours of each other's hearts. He also made his intentions clear to Charles Morrison, who took the news with surprising grace. "I figured I did not stand much of a chance," Morrison said. "The way she looks at you, any fool could see where her heart lies. But I had to try." Winter came early that year, snow blanketing the prairie by late October. Xavier finally gave in and moved his bedroll from the barn to the house, sleeping on a cot in the main room. It was not ideal, but it was warmer, and it meant more time near Beatrice. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, Xavier and Thomas playing cards while Beatrice sewed or read aloud from whatever book she had borrowed from the small library in town. It was domestic and peaceful, and Xavier had never been happier. On Christmas Eve, after Thomas had gone to bed, Xavier gave Beatrice her gift. It was a small box wrapped in brown paper, and when she opened it, she found a ring inside. Not a fancy diamond, he could not afford that yet, but a simple gold band with a small opal, her birthstone. "Beatrice Kelley," he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my days making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and she pulled him up to kiss her. When they finally broke apart, they found Thomas standing in the doorway of his room, grinning. "I heard everything," he said, "and I could not be happier. Welcome to the family, Vance." They were married in the spring in a simple ceremony at the church in La Junta. Beatrice wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue fabric that matched her eyes, and Xavier wore his best suit, the one he had bought for the occasion. Thomas stood up as his best man, and Mrs. Murphy from the boarding house served as Beatrice's attendant. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with all the love in his heart. They had a small celebration afterward at the church hall, with food provided by the ladies of the congregation and music from a fiddle player who lived on a nearby ranch. As the sun began to set, Xavier and Beatrice climbed into the wagon for the ride back to their ranch. Thomas had decided to stay in town for the night, giving them privacy, and as they rode through the twilight, Beatrice leaned against Xavier's shoulder, her hand resting on his thigh. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said. "When I was kneeling outside Doc Patterson's office, I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to lose everything. But instead, I found everything." "Your worries end today," Xavier quoted, remembering what he had said to her that first day. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. I will spend the rest of my life making sure your worries end with me." "Our worries," she corrected. "We are in this together now." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Xavier had been with women before, but never like this, never with someone he loved so completely. They explored each other slowly, learning what made the other sigh or gasp, creating an intimacy that went beyond the physical. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed, Beatrice traced her fingers over Xavier's chest. "I never thought I could have this," she said. "A husband who loves me, a home, a future. It seemed impossible. Nothing is impossible if you are willing to fight for it. You taught me that." "I did." "You fought for Thomas when anyone else would have given up. You did not let pride stop you from asking for help. You did not let despair win. You are the strongest person I know, Bea, and I am honored that you chose me." She kissed him, long and deep. "I would choose you every day for the rest of my life." The first year of their marriage was not easy. The ranch was small and money was tight. They had to be careful with every penny, planning and budgeting and making do with what they had. But they were happy, building a life together day by day. Thomas recovered his full strength and proved to be an excellent ranch hand. He had a gift with horses, just as he had hoped, and started breaking and training wild mustangs that Xavier would capture from the open range. The trained horses sold well, providing additional income for the ranch. Xavier bought a small herd of cattle that spring, 20 head to start with. It was not much, but it was a beginning. He and Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, building their herd, improving the grazing land, and expanding their operation slowly but steadily. Beatrice managed the household with skill and efficiency. She kept a large garden that provided vegetables all summer and canned goods for the winter. Her chickens laid eggs that she sold in town, and her butter was in high demand. She also took in sewing work when she had time, adding a little extra to their savings. But more than that, she made their house a home. She filled it with laughter and love, with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of singing. When Xavier came in exhausted from a long day's work, she was there with a smile and a kiss and a meal that somehow made everything better. Their first real test came that summer when a drought hit the region. The river ran low, grass turned brown and brittle, and cattle began to suffer. Many of the smaller ranchers in the area went under, forced to sell their land to larger operations or simply abandon their claims. Xavier and Beatrice fought to save their ranch. They hauled water from the deepest part of the river to keep their cattle alive. They rationed their own food to make their supplies last. They worked until their hands bled and their backs ached, refusing to give up. Thomas was invaluable during this time, his youth and strength helping to carry them through. The three of them worked as a team, supporting and encouraging each other even when things looked darkest. The drought finally broke in September with a series of storms that turned the prairie green again. They had lost 5 head of cattle, a significant portion of their small herd, but they had survived. And survival felt like victory. That winter, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier on a snowy evening in December, almost a year to the day after he had proposed. He lifted her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer on his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. "I love you so much, Bea, and I am going to love this baby just as much." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as she grew larger, the summer heat became oppressive. But she never complained, treating each day as a gift. Xavier became almost comically protective, trying to keep her from doing any work that he deemed too strenuous. Beatrice tolerated this for a while, then finally put her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said. "I need to stay active and useful. It is good for the baby." Thomas found the whole thing hilarious, teasing Xavier about hovering and offering running commentary on his brother-in-law's overprotective behavior. But Xavier did not care. He had found something precious beyond measure, and he was determined to protect it. Their son was born in early August of 1880, delivered by Doc Patterson, who made the trip out from La Junta. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Xavier feared he might lose them both. But Beatrice was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and finally, as the sun rose on a new day, their baby boy entered the world. "He is perfect," Xavier said, cradling his son in his arms. The baby had his mother's coloring, that same honey blonde hair and eyes that would probably turn blue. Absolutely perfect. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth on various options. But looking at his son, Xavier suddenly knew. "James," he said, "after my father, James Edward Vance." "James," Beatrice repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, little James. Welcome to the world." Thomas was besotted with his nephew, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him with exaggerated care. "I am going to teach him everything," he declared. "How to ride, how to rope, how to train horses. He's going to be the best cowboy in Colorado." "Let him learn to walk first," Beatrice said, laughing. Becoming parents changed everything and nothing all at once. The work of the ranch continued, but now there was a baby in the house, filling their days with crying and cooing and countless diaper changes. Xavier learned to work on less sleep, catching a few hours here and there while Beatrice nursed James, or when Thomas took a turn watching him. But he had never been happier. Coming in from the fields to find Beatrice rocking their son by the fire, singing softly, it filled him with a contentment so deep, it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. This was what he had been searching for all those lonely years. This was home. The ranch continued to grow. By James's second birthday, they had 50 head of cattle and were beginning to make a real profit. Xavier hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, allowing him and Thomas to focus on expanding their horse breeding operation. Thomas, now 23, had become a true expert with horses. He could gentle even the wildest Mustang, and his trained horses were sought after throughout the region. He started talking about maybe buying his own land someday, starting his own breeding operation. "You will always have a place here," Xavier told him. "But I understand if you want to build something of your own." "I am not ready to leave yet," Thomas said. "This is home. You and Bea are my family. But maybe in a few years, when I have saved enough, I will look into getting my own spread nearby." Beatrice got pregnant again in the spring of 1883. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and she seemed to bloom with it. Xavier loved seeing her round with their child, loved feeling the baby kick under his hand when he held her at night. Their daughter, Sarah Ann Vance, was born in December during the first snowfall of winter. She was tiny and perfect, with Xavier's dark hair and eyes that shifted between gray and green. Where James had been a fussy baby, Sarah was calm and content, happy to be held by anyone. "2 children," Beatrice said, watching Xavier rock Sarah while James played at his feet. "We are truly blessed." "We are," Xavier agreed. "More than I ever thought possible." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, allowing them to build an addition onto the house with 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. They bought better furniture, acquired more land, and grew their herds. Xavier and Beatrice became respected members of the community, known for their hard work and generosity. They helped new settlers when they arrived, remembering how desperate they had once been. Xavier would offer advice on ranching, sometimes even extending credit or loans to help people get started. Beatrice organized charity drives through the church, collecting food and clothing for families struggling through hard winters. "You are giving away too much," Charles Morrison told Xavier one day when he stopped by to buy a horse. They had become friendly over the years, Morrison marrying a widow from town and settling into comfortable middle age. "You will never get rich if you keep helping everyone who asks." "I do not need to be rich," Xavier said. "I just need to have enough, and I have more than enough." The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an aptitude for ranching. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that reminded Xavier of her mother. Thomas finally bought his own land in 1887, a spread adjacent to Xavier's property. He had courted and married a schoolteacher from La Junta named Elizabeth, a practical woman with a warm smile and a head for numbers. They built a small house and started their own horse breeding operation, remaining close neighbors and frequent dinner guests. In 1888, Beatrice became pregnant again, to everyone's surprise. She was 32 now, and they had assumed their family was complete. But she welcomed the news with joy, and Xavier found himself excited to be a father again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, complicated by Beatrice's age and the demands of running a household with two active children. Doc Patterson visited regularly, monitoring her health and prescribing rest that Beatrice mostly ignored. "I cannot just lie around," she told Xavier when he tried to make her take it easy. "There is too much to do. Then let me hire help, get a girl from town to help with the house and the children." She resisted at first, but eventually agreed when it became clear that she really did need assistance. They hired Anna, the 16-year-old daughter of a farmer who had fallen on hard times, and she quickly became indispensable. Their second son, Daniel, was born in April of 1889 after a labor that scared 10 years off Xavier's life. There were complications, bleeding that would not stop, and for a terrifying hour, he thought he might lose Beatrice. But Doc Patterson knew his business, and eventually mother and baby were declared out of danger. "No more," Xavier told Beatrice firmly as she recovered. "I nearly lost you. I cannot go through that again." "No more," she agreed, holding baby Daniel close. 3 is a perfect number." Daniel was a surprise, a baby with bright red hair that came from neither parent, some distant ancestor asserting themselves. He was also the loudest of their children, with lungs that could wake the dead and a temperament that demanded constant attention. "Where did this one come from?" Xavier joked, walking Daniel at 2 in the morning while the baby screamed. "Did we get switched at birth?" But despite the sleepless nights, Daniel quickly became beloved. James and Sarah doted on their baby brother, and even Thomas and Elizabeth would visit just to hold him. As the 1890s began, Xavier looked around at the life he had built and felt profound gratitude. The ranch now sprawled across 2,000 acres, running over 200 head of cattle, and maintaining a breeding program for horses that was known throughout Colorado. The original small house had been expanded and improved until it was a proper ranch house, with 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor where they entertained neighbors and business associates. More importantly, his family was thriving. James, now 10, was already showing the makings of a fine rancher. Sarah, at 7, had her mother's practical nature and her father's love of the land. And Daniel, the surprise baby, was growing into a red-headed terror who kept them all laughing. But the heart of it all was Beatrice. She was 34 now, and Xavier thought she was more beautiful than ever. Life had marked her, tiny lines around her eyes and mouth, a few silver threads in her honey-colored hair. But to him, she was perfect. She was his partner, his best friend, his love. One evening in the summer of 1892, they sat on the porch together after the children were in bed, watching the sun set over the prairie. Beatrice was mending a shirt, her fingers moving with practiced ease, while Xavier worked on a piece of leather tack. "Do you ever think about that day in La Junta?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "When you bought the medicine for Thomas?" "All the time," Xavier said. "It was the best decision I ever made." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just walked past, if you had not stopped to help?" Xavier set down his work and took her hand. "I do not like to think about that, because then I would not have you. I would not have our children. I would still be drifting from town to town, alone and lonely. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day, B." She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other. And I thank God every day that you were in La Junta that particular afternoon, that you had just gotten paid, that you had a kind heart and the courage to use it. Your worries ended that day," Xavier said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. The night was warm, the crickets singing in the grass, and from inside the house they could hear Daniel cry out briefly in his sleep before settling again. This was everything Xavier had ever wanted. Not wealth or fame or glory, but this simple, profound happiness. A home, a family, a woman he loved more than life itself, work that mattered and a future full of promise. The 1890s brought changes to the West. The frontier was closing, they said, the wild lands being settled and tamed. La Junta grew from a small railroad town into a proper city, with telephone lines and electric lights. The old ways were giving way to the new, and sometimes Xavier felt like a relic of a bygone era. But on his ranch, with his family around him, he was content to be that relic. He had lived through the wildest days of the West, had seen the good and the bad of it, and he had found something worth holding on to. James grew into a responsible young man, taking on more of the ranch work as the years passed. At 15, he could do the work of any hand Xavier hired, and he did it with a maturity beyond his years. Sarah became a gifted rider and showed an interest in the business side of ranching, often sitting with Xavier as he went over the accounts. Daniel, true to form, was the wild one. At 6 years old, he was fearless and energetic, always getting into scrapes and keeping his parents on their toes. But he had a good heart, quick to help and generous with his affection. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 children of their own by now, and Sunday dinners at one ranch or the other became a tradition. The adults would sit around talking while the children ran wild outside, creating memories that Xavier knew would last a lifetime. "Can you believe we all started with nothing?" Thomas said one Sunday evening as they sat on Xavier's porch. "You with just the money from that cattle drive, me nearly dead from pneumonia, B with nothing but hope and determination." "We had each other," Beatrice said. "That was more than nothing." "It was everything," Xavier agreed. In 1897, James turned 17 and started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Her name was Catherine, a sweet girl with dark hair and a sensible disposition. Xavier liked her immediately, and Beatrice was delighted at the prospect of eventually having a daughter-in-law. "He is too young," Xavier protested weakly when Beatrice started talking about wedding plans. "He is the same age you were when you started working cattle," Beatrice pointed out. "And 2 years older than I was when I lost my parents and had to take care of Thomas. Out here, people grow up fast." She was right, of course. This was not the city where children could afford to be children well into their 20s. This was ranch country, where responsibility came early and hard work was just a fact of life. James and Catherine married in 1899, in a ceremony much larger and fancier than Xavier and Beatrice's had been. They held the wedding at the ranch, under a tent in the yard, with over 100 guests in attendance. Xavier watched his son pledge his life to this young woman and felt the weight of time passing. "When did he get so grown?" he asked Beatrice as they danced at the reception. "When we were not looking," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "But we raised him right. He is going to be a good husband and a good man." "Like his father," Xavier teased. "Better, probably. He learned from your mistakes." Xavier laughed and pulled her closer. After 20 years of marriage, he loved her more than ever. She was still his best friend, still the person he wanted to talk to at the end of every day. The passion between them had evolved, becoming something deeper and more enduring than the fire of youth, but it was no less powerful for that evolution. James and Catherine built a small house on the far side of the ranch, and James took over much of the day-to-day operation. It freed Xavier up to focus on the breeding program and to spend more time with his younger children. Sarah, now 16, was courting a young man who worked at the bank in La Junta. Xavier was less enthusiastic about this one. "He has soft hands," he complained to Beatrice. "He does not know the first thing about ranching." "Not everyone has to be a rancher," Beatrice said. "And besides, Sarah loves numbers and business. Maybe being married to a banker is exactly right for her." "I suppose," Xavier grumbled. But when he saw how happy Sarah was with young Robert, he could not help but approve. Daniel was the only one who showed no signs of settling down. At 13, he was all energy and rebellion, always testing boundaries and pushing limits. He talked about seeing the world, about becoming a soldier or maybe joining the Pony Express, even though that service had been defunct for nearly 40 years. "He will find his way," Beatrice said when Xavier worried. "He is just young. He needs time to figure out who he is." "I was working a ranch at his age. And you were miserable and lonely from what you have told me. Let him be young. Let him make mistakes. He will come back to us when he is ready." As the new century dawned in 1900, Xavier was 48 years old. His hair was more gray than brown now, and he moved a little stiffer in the mornings, joints protesting the years of hard work. But he was still strong, still capable of a full day's work when needed. Beatrice had just turned 44, and Xavier thought she was as beautiful as the day he married her. Maybe more so, because now her beauty was layered with everything they had been through together, every joy and sorrow and triumph. They stood together on New Year's Day, watching the sunrise over their land, and Xavier pulled her close. "A new century," he said. "Who knows what it will bring?" "Whatever it brings, we will face it together," Beatrice said. "Always," Xavier agreed. "From that day in La Junta until the end of time. Your worries end with me, Bea. That is my promise." She turned in his arms and kissed him, and in that kiss was 22 years of love and partnership. "And yours end with me," she said. "That is my promise to you." The years continued their steady march forward. James and Catherine had their first child in 1901, a boy they named Xavier after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Xavier felt the circle complete. He had gone from a lonely drifter to a family man, from someone with nothing to lose to someone with everything worth protecting. Sarah married her banker in 1903 and moved into La Junta. She helped Robert with the books at the bank and kept a beautiful home in town. She was happy, and that was all Xavier could ask for. Daniel remained a mystery, working the ranch when the mood struck him, but always talking about leaving, about seeing what was beyond the horizon. Xavier understood that wanderlust, remembered feeling it himself once upon a time. But he hoped his son would find what he was looking for without having to drift for years the way Xavier had. In 1905, Thomas fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it developed into pneumonia, the same disease that had nearly killed him as a young man. This time, his body could not fight it off. He died surrounded by his family, with Elizabeth holding his hand and Xavier sitting beside the bed. "Take care of them," Thomas whispered to Xavier near the end. "Elizabeth and the kids, promise me." "I promise," Xavier said, tears streaming down his face. "I promise, brother." Thomas Kelley died at the age of 46, leaving a wife, 3 children, and a legacy of hard work and kindness. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testimony to the life he had lived and the respect he had earned. Beatrice was devastated. Thomas had been her last link to her childhood, to her parents and their old life in Kansas. She grieved deeply, and Xavier held her through the long nights when the tears came. "He was so young," she kept saying. "He should have had more time." "I know, my love, I know." They helped Elizabeth as much as they could, folding her family into theirs, making sure she and the children never wanted for anything. Xavier took on Thomas's oldest son as a ranch hand, teaching him the skills his father would have taught him. The loss marked them both, a reminder that life was precious and finite. They held their own children a little closer, treasured each day a little more. Xavier found himself thinking about the fragility of it all, how quickly things could change. 27 years ago, he had been a stranger buying medicine for a desperate woman. Now they had built a life, a family, an empire of sorts, but it could all disappear in a heartbeat. "We have been so lucky," he told Beatrice one evening. "Luck had nothing to do with it," she said. "We worked for this. We fought for it. We chose each other and chose to build something that mattered." "I would choose you again," Xavier said. "Every time in every life I would choose you. And I would choose you, my cowboy who saved me and let me save him right back." Daniel finally left the ranch in 1907, joining the army much to Xavier's dismay. He was 18 now, old enough to make his own choices, but Xavier worried constantly. The world was changing, becoming more dangerous and complicated. But Daniel was determined, and Xavier had to let him go. "He will come back," Beatrice assured him. "He is your son. This land is in his blood. He just needs to see what is out there so he can appreciate what he has here." She was right, as usual. Daniel returned in 1910, having served his 3 years and seen enough of the world to know that his heart belonged in Colorado. He came back quieter, more mature, and ready to take his place on the ranch. By 1912, Xavier was 60 years old. He had lived longer than his father, built more than his father ever dreamed of. The ranch was prosperous. His family was thriving, and he could look back on his life with satisfaction. He and Beatrice were grandparents 5 times over now, with more grandchildren surely on the way. Sunday dinners had expanded to include 3 generations, the house bursting with noise and laughter and life. One evening in late summer, Xavier and Beatrice rode out to their favorite spot by the river, the same place where he had proposed so many years ago. The cottonwood tree had grown massive, providing deep shade, and they sat beneath it as the sun began to set. "You remember the first time we came here?" Xavier asked. "Of course. You told me you had feelings for me. I thought my heart might beat out of my chest." "Mine too." "I was so nervous I could hardly speak." Beatrice leaned against him, and they watched the light fade from the sky. "We have had a good life, Xavier Vance. The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a young man drifting from town to town. All because you stopped to help a stranger. All because you were brave enough to ask for help, and strong enough to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. The night was warm, the river murmuring softly over stones, and Xavier felt profoundly content. He had found his place in the world. He had found his home. "Your worries end today," he said softly, repeating the words he had spoken in 1878. Beatrice smiled and took his hand. "They ended that day," she said. "The moment you bought that medicine, the moment you offered us a chance, that was when my worries ended and my life began." "Mine too," Xavier said. "Mine too." They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell, back to the house full of light and family and love. Back to the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination, and the courage to take a chance on each other. And as Xavier helped Beatrice down from her horse and walked with her to the house, his arm around her waist and her head on his shoulder, he knew without doubt that he was the richest man alive. Not in money or land or possessions, but in the things that truly mattered. Love, family, home. His journey had started in loneliness and loss, but it had led him here to this perfect moment, to this perfect life. And he would not change a single thing about it. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch thrived under the combined efforts of Xavier, James, and Daniel. Catherine proved to be a capable ranch wife, and she and James had 4 children in total, each one adding to the chaos and joy of family gatherings. Sarah and Robert had 3 children, and though they lived in town, they visited the ranch regularly. The children loved spending time with their grandparents, learning to ride and helping with the animals. Xavier loved teaching them, passing on the knowledge and skills that had sustained him throughout his life. In 1915, Xavier and Beatrice celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. The ranch house was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by Beatrice with help from her daughters-in-law and Sarah. 40 years, Xavier said in his speech, looking at Beatrice. 40 years of marriage to the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. She has been my partner, my confidant, my best friend, and my love. I am the man I am today because she chose to take a chance on a cowboy who bought some medicine one day in La Junta. Beatrice wiped away tears as everyone applauded. When it was her turn to speak, she said, "I was at the lowest point in my life when Xavier found me. I was desperate and afraid, and I did not know how I was going to save my brother. But Xavier did not just buy medicine that day. He gave us hope. He gave us a future. He gave us a home. And he gave me a love that has sustained me through every joy and every sorrow these 40 years have brought. I love you, Xavier Vance, and I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Xavier danced with his wife, his daughters-in-law, his daughter, and all his granddaughters. He felt young again, reminded of why life was worth living. As the decade drew to a close, Xavier began to slow down. He was 67 now, and the years of hard work had taken their toll. He still did light ranch work, but more and more, he was content to supervise and advise while his sons did the heavy lifting. Beatrice, at 63, remained active and engaged. She kept a large garden, tended her chickens, and managed the household with the same efficiency she always had. But Xavier could see the silver in her hair and the way she moved more carefully on cold mornings. They were growing old together, just as they had promised. In 1920, they celebrated their 45th anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them. They rode out to the river, to their special place under the cottonwood tree, and spent the afternoon reminiscing about their life together. "You have any regrets?" Beatrice asked. Xavier thought about it carefully. "I regret that we lost Thomas so young. I regret that my parents could not see the life I built. But about us, about our choices, about the life we have lived together, not a single regret." "You, none," Beatrice said firmly. "Not one. Even the hard times, the losses and the struggles, they were all part of the journey that brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." They talked about the future, about the ranch and what would happen to it after they were gone. James was the natural heir, but they wanted to make sure all their children were provided for. They talked about their grandchildren and their hopes for the next generation. As the sun began to set, Xavier helped Beatrice to her feet, and they stood looking out over the land they had built together. The ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, prosperous and productive, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. "We did it," Xavier said. "We really did it. We built something that will last, something that matters." "We built it together," Beatrice said. "That is what makes it special. Not the land or the money or the success, but the fact that we did it side by side, partners in every sense of the word." Xavier pulled her close, and they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The river murmured its endless song, the prairie grass whispered in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed as they settled for the night. This was home. This was family. This was love that had endured for more than 4 decades and would endure for however many years they had left. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire. But more importantly, they had built a life rich in the things that truly mattered. As darkness fell, they rode back to the ranch house one more time, where lights glowed warmly in the windows, and the sound of their family could be heard even from a distance. Daniel's children were staying over, and the house was full of energy and laughter. Xavier helped Beatrice down from her horse, and they stood for a moment hand in hand, looking at the home they had created. "I love you," he said, the same 3 words he had spoken countless times over the years, but they never lost their power. "I love you too," Beatrice replied. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and love, into the life they had built from that single moment of kindness in La Junta so many years ago. A moment when a cowboy saw a woman begging for medicine, bought it all, and said, "Your worries end today." And her worries had ended. Not just that day, but every day since, because she had found a partner who would walk beside her through whatever came, just as he had found the same in her. Together, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages, born in desperation and forged in hope, proven through decades of partnership and devotion. Their story was not filled with grand gestures or dramatic rescues after that first day. Instead, it was filled with countless small moments, daily choices to love and support and stand beside each other. It was built on morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, on working side by side in the garden, on sitting together in the evening while the fire crackled and the children played. It was a quiet kind of love, the kind that lasts because it is rooted in friendship and respect as much as passion. The kind of love that weathers storms and celebrates sunshine, that grows deeper with each passing year instead of fading. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Xavier had given Beatrice that day in La Junta. Not just the medicine that saved her brother's life, but the chance for a future filled with love and family and home. The chance to build something that mattered, to create a legacy that would outlast them both. As they settled into their chairs by the fire that evening, surrounded by the chaos of grandchildren and the warmth of family, Xavier reached over and took Beatrice's hand. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they had been through together, everything they had built, everything they were. Their worries had ended that day in 1878, replaced by joy and love, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. And as the years continued to unfold, they faced them together, hand in hand, heart to heart, exactly as they had promised all those years ago under the cottonwood tree by the river. This was their happily ever after, not perfect but real, not easy but worth every struggle, not glamorous but rich in all the ways that mattered. They had found each other in the midst of desperation, and built a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and commitment. And every day for the rest of their lives, Xavier was grateful for that moment in La Junta, when he chose to stop to help, to change the course of 2 lives with a simple act of kindness. It had been the best decision he ever made, the one that gave him everything worth having. Their story became legend in the family, told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The tale of how Grandpa Xavier saved Grandma Beatrice and Uncle Thomas, how he said, "Your worries end today," and made good on that promise for the rest of his life. And in the telling and retelling, the story became more than just their history. It became a reminder of what was possible when people chose kindness over indifference, when they saw someone in need and decided to help, when they took a chance on love even when circumstances made it seem impossible. Xavier and Beatrice Vance lived out their days on that ranch in Colorado, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had tamed. They grew old together with grace and gratitude, never taking for granted the precious gift they had been given each other. And when the time finally came for them to rest, many years down the road, they left behind a legacy not just of land and cattle and success, but of love and partnership, and the kind of devotion that comes from truly choosing each other, every single day for a lifetime. Their worries had ended that day in La Junta. Their joy had only just begun.